All right, we're dealing with the role of Islam in this growing conflict. Note, it's not a future conflict. It's a growing one. And I'm going to give just a little background for somebody who may be watching for the first time. In Daniel 11, we have a king of the north and a king of the south. The king of the north invades Jerusalem from the north. It starts with the Medes and the Persians in Daniel 11, verse 2. In Daniel 7 and 2 and 7, it started with Babylon even before that. Notice they dropped in on Jerusalem from the north. Then the Greeks came in from the north. Then the Greek Empire splits north and south, Seleucid north, Ptolemy south, and they fight back and forth, and Jerusalem gets caught in the middle. Then the Romans come in from the north. Jesus dies in the middle in Jerusalem, but it also happens to be verse 22, which is in the middle of Daniel's prophecy. So Jesus knows what it's like to get caught in the middle, and when his people get caught in the middle, he's been there before them. Then the Roman Empire divides, and you have Christian North, Islamic South, and Jerusalem gets caught in the middle. There are three conflicts. There's the time of the Crusades, verses 25 to 28, 29 to 39, the Ottoman Islamic Empire, and the time of the end, verses 40 to 45. Some people have asked over time, is it the same God? Well, here's the honest truth. There are many Muslims and many Christians who are worshiping the same false god of force, fear, and anger, do it our way or else. There are some Christians and some Muslims who have found or in search of the same true God of love, truth, peace, and forgiveness, and I'm going to finish tonight really illustrating that truth. It is good news. Now, let's take a look at what Daniel 11 describes about this third and final conflict. At the time of the end, no question, it says, at the time of the end, the king of the south, which would be Islam, shall attack him, the king of the north, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and with many ships. He shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. So the king of the south is going to push against the king of the north, and the king of the north is going to retaliate in mighty ways, and it'll be very rapid in comparison to the other conflicts. Goes on to say, he, the king of the north, shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. That's western Jordan. He shall stretch out his hands against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at his hands. And friends, Jordan, Egypt, Libya, Ethiopia are all in the Muslim part of the world. So when the king of the south goes down, it's naming Muslim areas. The context is clear. Islam would be the king of the south. Now, let's take a look at how this conflict unfolds. In 634, 4 Muslim armies come up from the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, and they swing up through Israel and go up above, come back down. They bypass Jerusalem. They went all around it, and they left it like an island out there of Christian Byzantine forces holding Jerusalem. They came back down, surrounded it, and there was no way that those soldiers were going to get free. And they decided that they should surrender, but they would only surrender to Omar. Omar is the caliph. Now you need to know something. A pope is a political and a religious leader in the Christian world, right? A caliph is a political and religious leader in the Muslim world. So the king of the north and the king of the south are both church and religion, political and religion mixed. Daniel is very consistent here. And so we have these two powers, and they said, we will only surrender to the caliph who is down in the south. And so the king of the south, Omar, comes up to Jerusalem, and it surrenders. Get this. The armies originally came from the south, and the king of the south came from the south, and Jerusalem falls. So it's very clear, Islam is the power that comes from the south. And then the Christians, at the command of the Pope called for the Crusades, Holy Wars, and got it. And they came in from the north. And so Jerusalem gets caught in the middle between them. If you take a look at today's world, you see that area in red. It's an area that the Muslims consider their territory. It's predominantly to the south of Jerusalem, even to this day. Notice Turkey's striped. I call it somewhat schizophrenic, but it's getting more and more red and less yellow. It's politically aligned with NATO, but it's religiously aligned with the Muslim world. And Erdogan, as you're going to see tonight, is quickly moving it towards the Muslim world again, back to the Ottoman Empire types. Charles Malik was an ambassador to the United States from Lebanon. He was once president of the General Assembly, and he said the following at a lecture at Harvard. He's born an Orthodox Christian in Lebanon, and he always was an Orthodox Christian. But look what he says. The only hope for the Western world lies in alliance between the Roman Catholic Church, which is the most commonly influential, controlling, unifying element in Europe, and the Eastern Orthodox Church. Rome must unite with Eastern Orthodoxy because the Eastern Orthodox Church controls the Western Middle East. And if they do not solidify that control, Islam will march across Europe. Islam is political. The only hope of the Western world lies then in a united Europe under the control of the Pope. Wow, that's the same thing I've been saying in Scripture. But he saw it as a politician. And he was way ahead of the game because he said this in the 70s. But he wasn't done. Then he said this, and then all Protestant Christians around the globe must come into submission to the Pope, so we will have a unified Christian world. Why is it that he felt the world needed to unify behind the Pope? To fight against radical Islam. Now, I want you to notice something. We have a king of the north, papacy, king of the south, caliphate, Islam. We talk about an antichrist, and Daniel 7 in Revelation, it speaks great words. Antichrist means either in place of Christ or against Christ, and the papacy puts themselves in place of Christ, and Islam denies the divinity of Christ. They both fit in a way. Also, it talks about persecuting the saints. The papacy, during the Inquisition and the Crusades, well, who did they kill? They killed Muslims, Jews, and Christians who differed with them. Who did the Muslims kill during that same time? Christians, Jews, and Muslims who differed with them. Sounds pretty similar, doesn't it? God's people were always going to get caught in the middle. Rome, the city of Rome goes to the papacy. But Rome actually had two capitals, friends. One was Rome, the other was Constantinople, which became Istanbul. And the papacy gets one capital, and the Ottoman Empire gets the other. Isn't it interesting how Rome is carved up between these two powers? There are time prophecies for the papacy, the 1260 days. But Arab Islam had a prophecy in Revelation 9 of 150 years, and Turkish Islam had a prophecy that they would be there 391 years and 15 days. A guy by the name of Josiah Litch looked at that, and he predicted that the Ottoman Empire would collapse on August 11, 1840. August 11, 1840, the Ottoman Empire became subservient to the European empires in events that happened in Turkey, Lebanon, and Egypt, all on August 11, 1840. Now, they still were a power. But friends, one nation after another was still a power. Persia existed for a long time after it lost to Greece. But as far as prophecy is concerned, once you become subservient, you're no longer a power. And so that was the case here. And one woe is past, behold, still more woes are two more woes are coming after these things. Revelation 9. I want you to notice. Can you do this math for me? How many woes are there? 1 plus 2. 3 woes, right? That's not hard. How many conflicts are there in Daniel 11 between the king of the north and the king of the south after the breakup of Rome? 3. Daniel and Revelation are teaching the same thing here. We have 3 conflicts between Islam and Christianity. In the Arab phase, the first one, the Muslims had come up from Mecca and Medina, gone around that way, then out across North Africa and up into Spain. And so that was the Islamic caliphates of the Arab Islam. Then In verses 29 to 39, we have the second woe, or the second conflict. That's what's called the appointed time in Daniel 11:29. At the appointed time he shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. The former wants the crusades, the latter is the time of the end, but the appointed one is set aside by time prophecies. I didn't realize this for a long time, but we'll get a chance to look at that a little more later. Look what it says in verse 29. Back up for a moment. At the appointed time he shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. Why won't they get to Jerusalem this time? They got to Jerusalem the first time, they get to Jerusalem the second time, but they don't they get to Jerusalem on the third, they don't on the second. And it goes on to say, for ships from Cyprus shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return and rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he shall return and shall regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. So the king of the north is going to push back down sometime after the Crusades in a second conflict. He's going to head back down, but he's going to get stopped by ships from Cyprus. He's going to return home and fight against the covenant. And that is clearly explained in history on how it was fulfilled. It's the Battle of Lepanto in 1571 in the Venetian-Ottoman War. Here's what happens. The Muslims are wanting Cyprus because the Christians are using this as a naval base to contain the Muslim armies and navies in the Mediterranean. And so the Muslims send out a fleet with close to 300 ships, and they drop off 30,000 infantry on Cyprus. The Christian forces are losing, and the Pope says, hey guys, let's put together the Holy League, let's go down, retake Cyprus, and then go get Jerusalem from them. And so the papacy puts together the Holy League fleet, which is about 300 ships, and they are on their way to set Cyprus free. But the Muslim fleet had left Cyprus and had come around to over in this area, into the Bay of Lepanto. And the Christian fleet came in after them. Now remember, the prophecy says they're going to return, they're going to head back down here, but they're going to get stopped by ships from Cyprus. Where did those ships just come from? Cyprus. And they met in what was the largest naval engagement in history at that time. The Battle of Lepanto. And in just over 3 hours, somewhere like 50 to 70,000 men died. It was a brutal fight. The Muslim fleet was decimated, and the Christian fleet was so badly damaged that instead of sailing on the Cyprus, which had already fallen to the Muslims, they turned around and went home. They never made it to Cyprus, and they never made it to Jerusalem, and the prophecy said they would head back, but they would be hit by ships from Cyprus and return home. And here's what's amazing. For years I was telling about this, and then I found more of the history. Both the Muslim fleet and the Christian fleet in 1571 believed they were fighting the battle of Daniel 11:30. They knew where they were in history. That's amazing. But they said it's going to return home and fight against the covenant. And so, as they were victorious, the Pope had this painting put up in the Vatican. That's the Muslim fleet, that's the Christian fleet. You can tell the Muslims lost. That was celebrating the victory. Well, the next year, he didn't get to put a painting up of the Cyprus being taken or Jerusalem being taken. What did he put up the next year? He put up this one, 1572. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, when 70,000 plus Huguenots were killed in France. So they went and fought against the Muslims. They came home. tricked those that were following the Bible, the Huguenots, Protestants, and said they could have a safe passage for a big celebration. And when they gathered together for the celebration, they double-crossed them, revoked the safe passage, and surprised and killed them. And they put up that painting to celebrate turning against the covenant, those who were following the Bible. They fulfilled every detail. And so when people say, are you sure about the history of this prophecy? Oh yeah, I'm really sure about the history of this prophecy. Why does God allow these Muslim invasions into the Christian world? Well, you don't have to guess, because the Bible actually tells us. In Revelation 9, verses 20 and 21, but the rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues did not repent of the works of their hands, that they should not worship demons and idols of gold or silver, brass, stone, and wood, which can neither see nor hear nor walk. And they did not repent of their murders or their sorceries or their sexual immorality or their thefts. Remember, when Christians are not following God, he calls them spiritual adultery. What happened to ancient Israel when they weren't following God? Did they gain or lose protection? They lost it. What do you think is going to happen to God's people in the New Testament times if they claim to be worshiping God, but they start worshiping images instead? And both the Catholic and the Orthodox churches were putting up images and worshiping them. Is that going to cause you to gain or lose protection? Lose. And what does Muhammad especially hate? Image worship. The very thing that God said was getting them in trouble. Oh, in the Old Testament, God would send in the Abrahamic family members, Edom, Moab, or Ammon, or Babylonians, or something like that were in some way related to Abraham, to correct the Israelites. In the New Testament, he sends in the descendants of Ishmael, at least spiritually they claim that. Notice how the similarities go between Old and New Testament. But what is God doing? You see, way up here, up where it says Germanic tribes, there was a monk. His name, Martin Luther. And during the time of the Ottoman phase of the Second Woe, and Martin Luther's up here, and he starts saying, he nails the 95 Theses on the Wittenberg Chapel door, and he's saying, hey, everybody, follow the Bible. Don't follow the traditions of the church. That gets him in big trouble. What kept the Pope from marching an army up there and taking him out? Well, there were a couple of princes that supported him, but they didn't have enough military power to protect him, except for one thing. The Turks were pushing in. And the Pope had to send every kind of military he could out here to stop the advance of the Turks, and he even needed those German princes to come down, so he couldn't push them too hard on Martin Luther. And every time it looked like they could come get Martin Luther, the Turks would come pushing back in. And Martin Luther wrote that his greatest defender was the Sultan of Turkey. He figured out what was going on. And the Sultan of Turkey knew about Martin Luther and knew his activities were helping Luther, and he thought it was funny because anybody that was aggravating the Pope was a friend of his. Get this. Because the Turks were pushing against the papacy, the Reformation was not stamped out, and righteousness by faith and the Bible in the common languages became reality. God used Islam to spread the real gospel, in a way. Remember, God promised he will work all things for good. So we have these three conflicts, and the second one is called the appointed time. The Crusades, the time of the end, that second one is the appointed time. Now I want you to notice something. In Daniel, there are some time prophecies. Daniel chapter 12, to help us understand 11, it says there is a time prophecy of 1290 and 1335 from an abomination of desolation. And in Daniel's writings, there are two abominations of desolation. One is the fall of Jerusalem, Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, and the other one in Daniel 11, verses 30 to 31, especially verse 31, it is when the papacy gets the force of arms. Now get this. 1290 years from the fall of Jerusalem brings you to John Wycliffe. 1335 brings you the Huss. John Wycliffe is the theoretician or morning star of the Reformation. Huss is the first practicing reformer. It's supposed to bring you the good news, and this brings you to the beginning of righteousness by faith in the Bible and the common languages. The second abomination of desolation is from when the papacy gets the force of arms, and that's when Clovis supports the papacy in 508. And you come 1290 years, it brings you to 1798 when the papacy lost the ability to persecute people. And the 1335 brings us down to 1843, 44-ish, which we're going to find out is just after we already noticed it's just after the Ottoman Empire, but it is to bring us to the time of the end, actually, it says in Daniel. Now, I want you to notice these lines here. Between these two lines is the appointed time in Daniel. You have the rise and fall of the Ottoman Empire in there. You have the rise and fall of the Reformation in there. And Daniel verses 29 to 39 describes both the Ottomans and the Reformation. Now, I'm going to describe that in greater detail Saturday morning in what they call Sabbath school, which is 10 o'clock here, correct? And so if you want to get the greater detail on that one, on the appointed time and the abomination of desolation and all that, you are welcome to be here Saturday morning at 9:30. I just don't have time to go into any greater detail. 10 o'clock. Yes. All right. Also, what we know is the papacy gets a deadly wound but comes back with greater power than ever, according to Revelation 13. So one day in a hotel when I had nothing else to do, I graphed out the power curve of the papacy from 538 to 1798 to 1260 years. Then in 1929, they get the Vatican back and they start gaining power, and you get John Paul II really takes them up. Eventually, right before Jesus comes, they hit their peak of power, and then they come to their crashing end. All right? There is what I call the papal power curve. Then I wanted to see what the Islamic power curve would look like. And look how similar. You have Arab Islam in the Crusades, the Ottoman Empire, and then at the time of the end, again, after 1840, both the Ottomans and the papacy are down, but after 1840, they start coming back up. This is now the time of the end. And you get a third and final conflict. This is relatively short. Islam goes down. There's the greatest evangelistic opportunity of all time that happens right in there. We'll explore that tomorrow night. And then papacy falls, the king of the north. All right. At the same time, Revelation is telling us during the time of the end, there are two other powers coming into play. Remember, we already talked about the role of the United States. Revelation 13, the United States rises up and supports the king of the north. We already had a whole presentation on that. Now I'm going to give you just another interesting thing. Revelation 11 brings out the French Revolution with Marxist socialism, and in it ends up being supportive of the king of the south. So one becomes a friend of the king of the north, and the other a friend of the king of the south. And if you can't see what's about to happen, you are really about to get caught in the middle in this conflict. Let's look at this. I want you to see the context of Daniel 11. We're going to be looking at verse 8 in particular, but look, Revelation 11. I wish they weren't both chapter 11 because that messes me up all the time. But Revelation 11 and Daniel 11. Revelation 11, verse 3, I will give power to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days clothed in sackcloth. Now, the way I understand that, his two witnesses were really the Old and the New Testament, and for 1,260 years, they were available, chained in a monastery if you knew Latin, Greek, or Hebrew. But it was illegal for anybody to have it on their own. So it was there, but it was not available, clothed in sackcloth. And Revelation 11, verse 14, when it hits the end of the description of this power, it says the second woe was past. Behold, the third woe is coming quickly. Well, that's when the Ottoman Empire, the end of the second woe, became protector of the European empires. So that would be 1840. So somewhere around the end of the 1,260 days, which ended in 1798, so somewhere probably just a little before it, while the Bible was in mourning or sackcloth, but yet before 1840, this power was to come up. And take a look at how it's described. 11 verse 8. And their dead bodies of these two witnesses will lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. The last couple of years of that power, they were not just chained to the monastery. They were in France. They became illegal, period, and were destroyed, taken out of the churches and burned for the last couple of years of that 1,260 years. And so what you have is the French Revolution. Now look how the Bible describes it. And their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually or symbolically is called Sodom, Egypt, where our Lord was crucified. Sodom, a place without morals. Egypt, a place that claimed it didn't know God. But in Daniel 11, Egypt is also the king of the south. Also where our Lord was crucified. That's Jerusalem. And so French Revolution matches this symbolically. It was throughout morals. It claimed it didn't know God, that there was no God. And it had had the Bible, but totally rejected it and turned against God. And they called Jesus the wretch. And they totally blasphemed against God in the French Revolution. And it was a massive killing field as one group fought another group. Now, take a look at this explanation of the French Revolution. The French Revolution had a great and far-reaching impact that probably transformed the world more than any other revolution. Its repercussions include lessening the importance of religion, the rise of modern nationalism, spread of liberalism, and igniting the age of revolutions. Simple question. It's going after religion, right? In all of this, from the French Revolution and following, with the secular world that we live in today that's based on it, has it raised or lowered morals? It's lowered it, hasn't it? It's like Sodom. People claim to be Christian, but they're not paying close attention anymore. It's all tracing back, just like it's saying here, to the French Revolution. And so what do we have? In the 1790s, as the papacy is going down, we have a power that is like the king of the south coming up. The king of the south comes down, but what fights against the spread of Christianity? Well, by the 1840s, Karl Marx is turning the French Revolution into Marxist socialism. And it develops into the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, which develops into the Soviet Union. And for years, the Soviet Union is what is opposing the spread of Christianity like Islam had done. It's not Islam, but it's like it. It's doing the same work. Then the United States and the papacy, John Paul II and Ronald Reagan, worked together to bring down communism. And it falls. Or did it? Or did it just come up in a different way? I used to think, well, that was the end of it. But I now see that the power that is like the king of the south is joining with the king of the south in surprising ways. I'm going to come back to that in events that are happening in our world right now. But now let's go back to what Islam is doing. Could it happen? Could we have a massive holy war between Islam and papal-led Christianity in our world today? Well, friends, it's more of a question of when, not if. Why? Because both Sunni and Shiite Muslims are expecting a war in Syria, a 12th Imam, and they expect that there's going to be a battle over Al-Quds, and Jesus is going to destroy an antichrist by the name of Dajjal in Al-Quds. And they're going to set up a world caliphate in the city of Al-Quds that will conquer the world for Islam. So if both Sunni and Shiite Muslims, the radicals, believe that they are going to conquer the world for Islam, do you think there might be a battle someday? Oh yeah, and they're really dead set serious about it. They aren't kidding. We have prophecies of Mary that predict an Islamic Antichrist. Take a look at this one. Book Thunder of Justice. There will be a World War III, and it will be started by a man who wears the turban of the faith, a Muslim. Yet there's a more powerful one to rise in Syria. Oh yes, there's already wars going there. When has accomplished his work, he will cause destruction and pain and great persecution. The red will flow into the sea. There will be nothing to eat. The Antichrist is going to arise from the Mohammedan race, a Muslim. He's going to have a turban. The people will call it the Eye of Satan. He will be young, wearing a long robe. He will be very intelligent and well equipped for nuclear war. Worse than Hitler, connected with communists, fire rockets at us, and some will hit New York City. Well, that was supposedly a message from Mary. There were a whole bunch of prophecies in that book that were supposed to happen around the year 2000, but they didn't. But around the year 2000, those look like rockets hitting New York City. Now, we have many evangelical leaders and talk show hosts like Glenn Beck, evangelical prophecy guys like Wally Chubat, Joel Richardson, Joel Rosenberg, and others, Tim LaHaye, that believe that there will be an Islamic Antichrist. It's interesting, Martin Luther was asked about the Antichrist, and he said there are two of them. What do you mean? He said, think about that Daniel 2 statue, legs of iron. One foot ends up being Antichrist papacy, the other, he said, ends up being Antichrist Islam. But the king of the north, little horn, man of sin, beast power, only fully matches the papacy. About 2/3 of those characteristics can match Islam, but all of them match the papacy. So I don't really believe the Antichrist will be Muslim, but many evangelicals do. You're going to see how this plays out. So we have in Daniel 11:40, Islam attacks papal-led Christianity, and papal-led Christianity counterattacks and enters Israel, and Islam gets divided 3 ways. Let's read it again together, just so you know for sure what the text is saying. At the time of the end, the king of the south, Islam, shall attack him, the king of the north, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, horsemen, and many ships. He shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. He shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. Those are the people that escape. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. Those are overthrown. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at the king of the north's heels. Part of Islam will follow the papacy. So we have those who escape, those who are overthrown, Egypt and many countries, and those who follow after. Now in Revelation 13:3, it tells us that all the world follows the beast. So I've been told by some people, oh, the papacy will never take out radical Islam. And I said, well, this guy actually believed the papacy is the beast of Revelation. I said, so what about Revelation 13:3? It says all the world follows him. Do you believe it? And he said, yes. I said, where'd radical Islam go? Oh. There is no room for radical Islam. You see, the papacy wants Jerusalem and radical Islam wants Jerusalem. Somebody's not going to make it. And according to this, the papacy is the one that gets there. Islam doesn't, and that matches Daniel 11. If you take a look at a map, we have Egypt up here in northeastern Africa. Libya in the ancient boundaries took in the rest of North Africa, and Ethiopia took this area in. Edom, Moab, and Ammon is there. Egypt and many countries go down. Libya and Ethiopia follow the king of the north, and these folks escape. It's interesting. These are all Islamic areas, so it has to be Islam we're talking about. And if you look at a modern map, if this area is following the king of the north, then it leaves some of these out here at least to get many that fall down and are overcome. That's going to be a pretty big fight. How does it happen? Well, in 2011, when I published Well, I didn't publish. A publisher published our book. I had really 6 expectations. There are 5 of them on the screen. Number 1, radical Islam would anger the Pope for the third conflict. The papacy would call for war against radical Islam. The United States would supply the military power. Radical Islam would be overthrown. Moderate Islam would follow papal-led Christianity. And some Muslims would follow Jesus and the Bible. That would be number 6. All those were future in 2011. But in 2014, they started clicking off in sequential order. I guess what I'm telling you is, I really believe this is accurate because what we said and put in print is now happening in order. We are in the time of the end conflict. It is not all the way to its intensity yet, I don't think. I think it's going to get worse, but we have begun it. Here's how it happened. July 1, 2014. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the self-proclaimed leader of the Islamic State, stretching across Iraq and Syria, has vowed to lead the conquest of Rome as he called on Muslims to immigrate to his new land to find under its banner around the globe. All right, now let me stay there for a moment. Day 1 of the Islamic State Caliphate. For the first time since the Ottoman Empire, we had a functioning caliphate again on this planet. Day 1, they said they were going after who? Rome. I didn't know it was going to be that obvious on day 1. The prophecy said the king of the south will push against the king of the north. So the next question is, how long will it take the Pope, the man of peace, to call for war? He hadn't done that since the Ottoman Empire. It only took him 5.5 weeks. And he called for war. Do you remember? Oh, I do. I remember exactly where I was because I knew we had just moved into the whirlwind of Daniel 11. It's still in progress. August 7, 2014, Pope Francis appealed to world leaders on Thursday to help end the crisis in northern Iraq after a sweeping advance by radical Islamic State militants forced thousands of residents of Iraq's biggest Christian town to flee their homes. His Holiness addressed an urgent appeal to the international community to take action to end the humanitarian tragedy now underway, and he met military action, and he made that clear in the next few days through the papal ambassadors. Within 36 hours of the papal call for action, the United States, the Revelation 13 enforcer for the Vatican, struck the Islamic State for the first time. Pope called for war. 36 hours later, the United States is supplying the military action. Less than a week after the Pope's call for action, there were people in the world saying, oh, the Pope just called for action. It wasn't military action. It was supposed to be humanitarian action. The Pope didn't mean military action. And his ambassadors made it clear, no, he meant military action. The Holy See's ambassador to the United Nations, Silvano Tomasi, this weekend supported U.S. airstrikes aimed at halting the advance of Sunni Islamic State militants, calling for intervention now before it's too late. While the Vatican vocally disapproved of the U.S.-led campaign in Iraq in 2003 and the 2013 plan for airstrikes on Syria, fearing both might make the situation worse for Christians on the ground, fears of ethnic cleansing by Islamists has forced a policy change. Catch this. Daniel 11 says it's a push from the king of the south that forces the king of the north to go into action. They just admitted it. It's the Islamists. Those are the radicals who want to set up a caliphate in Al-Quds and force the world to follow Islam. When you see Islamists, those are the radicals wanting to set up a caliphate. So it's the Islamists that pushed them into it, just like the Bible said. Then, what has been declared by the self-declared Islamic State is clear. They want to kill the Pope. The threats against the Pope are credible. These, by the way, are in date order, these stories. You are watching the whirlwind unfold. The Pope had made himself a target by speaking out against human rights abuses committed against Christians in Syria and Iraq, as well as by approval of attempts by the United States to try and roll back ISIL, the Islamic State. Then the Islamic State started calling the Pope, or Obama, the dog of Rome. Why? The Pope said sick him, and Obama and the U.S. military bit. Got to admit, they had a point. The U.S. is the guard dog for Rome, the attack dog. Then the Pope said this. I find this one amazing. See if you do. Pope Francis said that equating Islam with violence was wrong and called on Muslim leaders to issue a global condemnation of terrorism to help dispel the stereotype. Remember, the prophecy says he's going to go after radical Islam, the Islamists, the Caliphate believers, but he's going to get a lot of the Muslims to follow him. I didn't unpack something. I've got to back up just a bit. It said Egypt and many countries fall. Egypt, remember, Israel is a literal, but it's religiously global. Everything is both a literal with a global application. Egypt is the birthplace of modern radical Islam, the Muslim Brotherhood, in the 1920s. And so when it's talking about Egypt, yes, I believe Egypt will radicalize, but I also believe it applies to radical Islam all over the world that comes from the Muslim Brotherhood out of Egypt. When it talks about Libya and Ethiopia, I see that as the Muslim world that decides to follow papal-led Christianity. You could call them moderates if you want. Well, so he's working on getting those moderates to join with him. He's calling on them to condemn terrorism, which they're beginning to do in great numbers. You just can't say all Muslims are terrorists, just as you can't say that all Christians are fundamentalist. We have our share of them, fundamentalist. All religions have these little groups. Did that get your attention or not? So he's saying, okay, these Islamists are the fundamentalists. They're going strictly by the Quran and Hadith, the traditions. They're the fundamentalist Muslims, and he's called for war against them. He's called for military action against them. He says, but we have our own problems with fundamentalists. You know, the Christians that actually follow the Bible, can you not see if he's willing to take out the Muslim fundamentalist and he says he's got a problem with Christian fundamentalists, what's coming next? And in the prophecy, after he takes down radical Islam, he turns on those who follow Jesus in the Bible. You can see it coming when you know the prophecy. Would the papacy ever do that? Ever heard of the Inquisition? Oh, they've done it many times in the past. In Paris, in January 2015, a historic crowd of more than 1 million people, including more than 40 world leaders, jammed the streets on Sunday. Why? Because a couple of days earlier, about 48 hours earlier, a couple of guys that were connected to the Islamic State had attacked Charlie Hebdo magazine. And then the firefight had moved on to a Jewish deli. 17 people died in those French attacks. And now we have more than 1 million people protesting against terrorism. Leaders often at odds, such as Ukrainian president and Russian foreign minister, Israeli Netanyahu, and Palestinian Mahmoud Abbas. At that time, the Russians and the Ukrainians were shooting at each other in the Ukraine, but their leaders were side by side demonstrating against radical Islam. Israeli Netanyahu and Palestinian Abbas, they're not good friends, but they were demonstrating side by side. How many of you remember the Charlie Hebdo thing when several people got killed? Quite a few of you. How many of you remember the same week when over 2,000 people were killed by a terrorist attack? Anybody remember? Probably not. It was barely mentioned in the Western press, especially in the American press. Over 2,000 people killed. That's like another 9/11, folks, and we ignored it. But it did happen. The BBC reported it. Nigeria says the number of people who lost their lives in an assault by Boko Haram militants on the town of Baga last week was no more than 150. The defense ministry said this figure included many of the terrorists who had attacked the town in Borno State and faced resistance by troops. Local officials earlier estimated the number of deaths as many as 2,000. Nigeria has often been accused of underestimating casualty figures to downplay the threat of Boko Haram. Boko Haram is a radical Muslim group that has sworn allegiance to the Islamic State. I'm well aware of Boko Haram. I've been taken in and out of northern Nigeria in hiding because it was Boko Haram territory. I was there a few months before this. 2,000 to 3,000 Christians are killed every year in northern Nigeria. This just happened to be one of the largest of all time, when over 2,000 were killed at one time. And by the way, the president, his name was Goodluck Jonathan. Seriously, that was his name. He ran out of luck because the country turned on him on this one. They knew that over 2,000 people were killed, and he was trying to get away with saying 150 were killed. And they voted him out of office. They rejected him and put somebody else in who's done no better. There's still 2,000 to 3,000 Christians getting killed every year. Why in the world don't you hear about this stuff? I can tell you. Because the Western media doesn't care about African Christians. The media isn't very Christian friendly to start out with, and African Christian, who cares about them? They talk about the evils of racism, but they're racist. They don't care about Africans. But God does. God cares about every one of us. And when I see what's going on in the world, sometimes it gets me quite irritated on the way we treat and don't even care about other people. We should be praying for our brothers and sisters in Christ that are suffering all over. Here's another one. 2 months later, in an unusually blunt endorsement of military action, the Vatican's top diplomat at the United Nations in Geneva has called for a coordinated international force to stop the so-called Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. He said the joint statement originated with Russia, which traditionally sees itself as a protector of Orthodox Christians in the Middle East. Russia and the Vatican joined together against radical Islam? The Pope calls for war. Boom! He's got the United States and their allies. Several months later, he's got Russia saying, we're in with you. And about 6 months later, the world was shocked when Russia moved troops and planes into the fight in Syria. There have been some interesting problems that happened there. Did you ever hear about the day that 300 Russians were killed attacking 7 Americans? Oh, it happened. 7 special forces of the United States with some Kurds. They came under attack and they sent the message in through diplomatic channels, back off, and the Russians didn't back off. So the Americans called in an airstrike. And close to 300 Russians died in Syria. You know what Putin said? Whoops, those must have been mercenaries. Wouldn't have been our guys there. And the United States let it go because we didn't want a conflict over it. But that should tell you what happens when a bunch of Russians attack 7 Americans. The U.S. military's air power is still pretty potent, even against the Russians. Yeah, things were happening. And by the way, if you go looking, you can find that story I just talked about. It's there, but it didn't get published very far. Then Pope Francis headed to the United Nations, and wow, everybody was excited. But shrewdly, methodically, and with a showman's flair, the soft-spoken 78-year-old Argentinian Jesuit priest named Pope Francis showed Thursday that he is running to become president of the planet. Think about this. During the Crusades, the Pope becomes more powerful. During the Ottomans, the Pope becomes more powerful. And when we have a third and final conflict, as Islam starts rising in power, who else is coming up? The Pope. We are in the third round, folks. Everything is there. That's not bad news to be in the third round. That means we're getting really close to the coming of Jesus, all right? Then we had an immigration crisis. I don't think this wave can stop, said Sonia Licht of the International Center for Democratic Transition. The global north must be prepared that the global south is on the move, the entire global south. This is not just a problem for Europe, but for the whole world. Oh, so the south is pushing against the north. Could you blame Muslims that wanted to get out of Syria and North Africa with all the troubles there? I'd want my family out of there too. But some of them are coming out to take over Europe. It's hard to tell which ones are which. And about then, we began an American presidential campaign. Remember 4 years ago? It was considered one of the craziest campaigns ever, but now we've got another one to take its place. And we had a candidate that started talking about building a wall on the southern border because there's a south pushing against the north all over the world. Trump was asked about radical Islam. He said, the point is they want to do serious harm. We have to take them out. We have to take them out very, very swiftly and viciously if necessary. We've got to destroy the brand of jihad. And Daniel 11 had said, radical Islam, the caliphate Islamists, would be taken out. And he's now saying that's what he wanted to do. But everybody knew he couldn't win, but then he did. And what did he say during his inaugural address? We will reinforce old alliances and form new ones, and unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism, which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth. Oh yeah. Daniel says the king of the north wipes out Egypt and many countries. Radical Islam. But the papacy doesn't have an army. Revelation 13 tells us at the time of the end that that's the United States military, and boom, you've got Trump saying he's going to do it. And he said about doing it. He doubled the number of bombs and missiles landing. He went from 50-some thousand to 100-some thousand bombs and missiles a year hitting the Islamic State when he took over. He was pounding them into the desert dust. Where does he go on his first trip? You can't make this up. He stops first in Saudi Arabia, where the king of the south comes from. Then he goes to Israel, the one caught in the middle. And then he goes to the Vatican, where the king of the north comes from. He's 3 for 3 for Daniel 11's powers on his first trip. The visit to Saudi Arabia, he said, will include a truly historic gathering in Saudi Arabia with leaders from all across the Muslim world. We will begin to construct a new foundation of cooperation and support with our Muslim allies to combat extremism, terrorism, and violence. And that has been coming to fruition in what's called the Abraham Accords, as one Arab nation after another starts making peace with Israel. And it's all about radical Islam, folks. You'll see that in a bit. Then President Trump announced that he's officially recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Oh, did that set off the radical Muslims? And within a couple of days, they held a meeting in Turkey. Turkey, which is supposed to be a NATO member, folks. Turkey hosts a meeting on how to get back and even with the United States. Soleimani, the commander of the Al-Quds force, that's the Iranian Al-Quds force, says his nation is ready to support Palestinian forces in the Gaza Strip days after the U.S. recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. That, my friends, is a loaded paragraph that Bloomberg and the New York Times and the rest of you do not want you to understand. They told the truth, but hid it in plain sight. Iran's Soleimani is commander of the Al-Quds force. You see, Al-Quds is the city both the Sunni and the Shiite believe will become the capital of the caliphate when they conquer the world. And that city is not in Iran. And so their special forces are called the Al-Quds force so that they can conquer that city for Islam. What they don't tell you, that Al-Quds is Jerusalem. Got a question. Do you think Jerusalem just might get caught in the middle? If Al-Quds is the city that both Sunni and Shiite radical Islamists plan to set up as their capital of the Islamic world? Yeah. But how often do you hear that in the press? That it's the same place. They don't tell you that. They hide it in plain sight. Go Google Al-Quds and see where it is. It is Jerusalem. Now get this. If the commander of the Al-Quds force is an Iranian, do you get a little idea why Israel doesn't trust Iran? Their special forces are named after Jerusalem's capital because Iran claims they're going to wipe Israel off the map and take that as their capital. Yeah, it's not likely to settle out real peaceful there, is it? But then Muslims start lining up against radical Islam. Amazingly, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia's powerful crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, has described Turkey as part of a triangle of evil, along with Iran and hardline Islamist groups. Remember, Islamists are those who want a caliphate in Al-Quds, Jerusalem. The Saudi prince also accused Turkey of trying to reinstate the Islamic caliphate, abolished nearly a century ago when the Ottoman Empire collapsed. Now in the Atlantic, he still talks about this triangle. In this triangle, they are trying to promote the idea that our duty as Muslims is to reestablish the caliphate, that the glory of Islam is in building an empire by force. We have no duty anymore to fight the spread of Islam, but in the triangle of evil, they want to manipulate Muslims to tell them that their duty as Muslims requires the establishment of a Muslim empire. I believe the Palestinians and the Israelis have the right to have their own land. Boom! There's your foundation for the day's peace agreements. Saudi Arabia has not signed on to a peace deal with Israel, but they've been doing a lot of behind-the-scenes, quietly work with Israel. But we have to have a peace agreement to assure the stability for everyone and to have normal relations. Those were fighting words. Within a couple of days, Mohammed bin Salman was involved. There was a coup attempt. There was gunfire in the palace, and Mohammed bin Salman disappeared from sight. He was missing for a couple of weeks. Iran figured he was dead, and they began to celebrate the death of Mohammed bin Salman. Do you think that made Mohammed bin Salman like them any better? They were celebrating his death, which was not true. He was very much alive. Just give you a little idea of the feelings that are going on. A lot of Muslims hate radicalized Islam and the Islamists. They really hate it. They would rather work together with Israel, the United States, and the papacy than with radical Islam, just like the prophecy predicts. Then the U.S. opens the embassy on May 14, 2018. Why is that important? May 14 is exactly 70 years to the day from the founding of the modern nation of Israel. To the day. Trump picks that day. He rushes it by over a year to get it done on that day. They first said they were going to do it in 2019. But he wanted to get it done that day. Take a look at this coin. The Temple Group, which is a group that is ready to rebuild the temple on the Temple Mount, gave this coin as what they want to use as their temple tax coin if they are able to rebuild the temple. Notice in the background, you have a picture of Cyrus the Great. After 70 years of captivity, Cyrus said to the Jewish people, Jerusalem is yours, and they rebuilt the temple. Now, remember, after 70 years of captivity, Cyrus says that. After 70 years of statehood, Trump says Jerusalem is yours, and they believe that it will result in them rebuilding the temple. Now, could it ever be possible that anything happened to President Trump and a guy by the name of Michael Pence take over? Nearly happened last week, right? Who knows? I don't know if Trump's going to come back in the office again or not. But if he does, and anything happens to him, Michael Pence becomes president. Michael Pence believes in rebuilding the temple on the Temple Mount. Check it out. We live in interesting times, folks. We really do. Trump warned Iran's Rouhani, threaten us and you will suffer. There was their response. Picture's worth 1,000 words. You know who this guy is? Soleimani, the commander of the Al-Quds force, the special forces of Iran. And so they have him holding a radio. He's calling in of some kind of a terrorist strike on the White House, the U.S. flag is falling, and on the little piece of English says, "We will crush the USA under our feet." If you're Donald Trump, are you going to remember this guy? He claims to have over 1,000 cells in the United States waiting for his command to attack. But then the Vatican headed to the Gulf to make peace with the Arab nations. You know, the ones that hate radical Islam. The meaning of the Pope's historic visit to the United Arab Emirates. What has changed in brief is the dual rise of the Muslim Brotherhood. Remember, they came from Egypt in the 1920s. And the Islamic State. The following analysis applies equally to the Emirates and to Saudi Arabia and to several other countries. Facing direct challenges, the Gulf states calculated that they could no longer appease Islamists and should instead crush them. That is precisely what they have done. Both in the UAE and Saudi Arabia, the institutional authorities of Islam and the political authorities with which they are aligned have just bought themselves an institutional ally. They're considering the Pope their ally, folks, if not a theological one. Whether the alliance keeps the theological barbarians at bay, the Islamist, is another question. The so-called moderate Muslims in 2019 are joining together with the Vatican. Then the Saudi crown prince defended China's right to throw millions of Muslims in jail for their self-defense. So the Chinese to say, oh, all the Muslims are at risk, and they're locking them up by the millions. Remember, Trump said he was going to cause all kinds of trouble for Iran if they caused trouble, and so Iran started taking out tankers and attacking airports and pipelines and refineries in Saudi Arabia. And they put this picture out. You have American flagged and Israeli flagged ships smoking and sinking. Take a close look. Remember their pictures. They say we drowned them all. This is a Palestinian headscarf. And what's in the background that it's all about? The Dome of the Rock. Anybody know where that's at? It's in Al-Quds, otherwise known as Jerusalem. All this that Iran is doing is about getting Jerusalem back. And they're using the Palestinian cause as just an excuse to get it. It's all in their pictures and their artwork. The Vatican's got interesting artwork, and so does Iran. The King of the North and the King of the South both spill a lot in their pictures. Somebody says, well, Tim, you started talking about the Islamic State, but they're not that powerful. No, they're not, but they're gaining power again. But the end-time caliphate could be either out of the Islamic State, it could be out of Turkey, it could be out of Iran. All these Islamists could even end up working together. Remember, Mohammed bin Salman says the Islamist, which is Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram and them, Turkey and Iran. Now take a look at what people in Israel are thinking. Turkey's President Erdogan has high ambitions. He wants to take his country back to what he perceives as the glory days of the Ottoman Empire. Erdogan recently converted 2 Istanbul landmarks operating as museums, the Hagia Sophia and St. Xavier in Chora, into mosque in a bid to flex his Islamist muscles. Again, he's openly said he's an Islamist, wanting the caliphate in Jerusalem. When he set the Hagia Sophia back as a mosque, he said that was a down payment on setting Alaska Mosque free, which is in Jerusalem. In other words, he's headed for Jerusalem. Continuing, and now, with his attention turned to Greece and Libya, Erdogan seems to be looking for regional dominance. The question is how all this bodes for Israel. So, Greece is in a running conflict with Turkey now, and French and Greece ships have actually physically bumped into Turkish ships in their playing chicken out there in the Mediterranean. And Turkey's taking over Greek islands. Turkey's being a big bully in the area. They're sending troops into Libya. Turkey's bellicose behavior stems from its perception that in the current international context, acting aggressively doesn't necessarily incur major costs from the global powers. The U.S. is too sidetracked by COVID and political turmoil to do anything about it. Radical Islam realizes they have an opportunity right now. With Erdogan's Islamist identity in close ties with the Muslim Brotherhood, Qatar, and Hamas, this triangle seems dangerous for Israel. One of the reasons Israel and the United Arab Emirates have worked out a normalization agreement between them is related to the growing concern from Turkey's greater role in the region. Why are we having the Abraham Accords? The Muslims and Israel signing agreements, United Arab Emirates, Sudan, and some others are looking at it. Why are they doing it? Why is Saudi Arabia friendly with Israel? Because they're all worried about Turkey and Iran, the Islamist. And they're joining with Israel, the Vatican, and the U.S. against radical Islam. Daniel 11 is on the roll in front of your eyes. But the media ignores it. And what would you expect? Do you think Satan wants you to understand this stuff? No, but now you're going to see it if you're paying attention. It's there. Iran vows a hit on all involved in the U.S. killing of a top general. Oh, this was less than a month ago. The chief of Iran's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard threatened Saturday to go after everyone who had a role in the top general's January killing. Remember Soleimani? Trump had him killed on the 1st of January. He'd had enough of it. And on January 7, Iran retaliated and struck American military bases. If any Americans would have died that night, we would have been at war. But no Americans died on January 7. And then COVID took over, and everybody instantly forgot. Iran has not. They say they're going to come back and do something else. You should see Trump's response. U.S. President Donald Trump warned this week that Washington would harshly respond to any Iranian attempts to take revenge for the death of General Soleimani, tweeting that if they hit us in any way, any form, written instructions already done, we're going to hit them 1,000 times harder. If they hit while Trump's still in office, I don't think he hesitates. You see, he wouldn't mind being a wartime president right now. Maybe people would gather around him. Could be good for his election chances. If they hit him, I would expect him to hit back really hard, just as he's already promised. That's where we are right now. How quickly could life change? By the time you get home, this world could be changing rapidly tonight. I don't know how much time we have, but I tell people this. I figure that everything could be done in Bible prophecy in less than a year. If God said he's going to cut it short in righteousness, he could do it. I wouldn't mind being with Jesus really quick, would you? It could also be put on delay by God. I don't know. So you should be ready to be out of here in less than a year, and you need to be ready to die of old age. And if you're not ready for both, you're not ready. But we have never been here before. All this stuff is right there and happening. How does this have current political application? Well, the political right leans to the king of the north, papal-led Christianity. It's pretty clear with Trump, isn't it? The political left leans towards the king of the south, radical Islam. Let me illustrate it. Remember, I already talked about this. Coming out of the French Revolution, you have Karl Marx turning it into Marxism and into communism. They come down, but it just goes underground in the political left. It had already been there, but it continues to simmer. And let me show you the similarities between Islam and atheistic secularism, the political left. They both hate Israel. Pay attention, that's true. The political right loves Israel. Political left hates Israel. This is from England. The origins of today's crisis in labor, which is the political left, date back to the 19th century. That's back to when Karl Marx comes up with this. And ever since, Jews have been seen as a problem by a strain of socialist thought. The current anti-Semitism crisis in the left has not come out of nowhere. Instead, it has its roots in a tradition on the left itself, which at best has always had difficulty in responding swiftly to anti-Semitism, and at worst, excused or condoned, even promoted it. Both the political left and Islam hate capitalism. Both hate papal-led Christianity. Both hate American exceptionalism. Radical Islam shouts death to America in their street demonstrations. The political left says down with America. Interesting on that. They both hate conservative politicians. They both like social justice with the LGBTQ exception. You see, the political left works together with Islam, but it's okay for Muslims to kill homosexuals. Oh yeah, that's the way they see it. Because they say Muslims have been the victims of discrimination for so long that it's okay if they discriminate against homosexuals. But nobody else can do it, just the Muslims. That's craziness. But that's what happens. They both, political left and Islam, think Jesus was just a good man and the Bible's not the authority. Boy, isn't that an interesting list of parallels? And they both both the United States and atheistic secularism come out of the 1798 to 1840 time zone. Right where that is supposed to be coming from, according to the prophecy. You have the political left and the political right. So folks, what am I telling you? No political party will save you. Only Jesus will save you. No politician will save you. Only Jesus will save you. No church will save you. Only Jesus will save you. Make sure you get that right. Because if you don't, you will begin hating people and people will be hating you. And if you throw your allegiance primarily behind a political party, you will not be effective in sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. I call myself an equal opportunity offender. I step on toes on both sides. I encourage you, make sure you're serving Jesus Christ. Because God's people are supposed to love everybody. The king of the south and the political left go down. The king of the north and the political right go down. God's people get caught in the middle, but they're the last ones standing with Jesus Christ. I want you to be standing with Jesus. I hope that's coming clear. Take a look at how radical Islam has linked with the political left. By tapping into an international politics of anti-imperialism, national liberation, and human rights, Palestinian liberation fighters, this is in the 1960s, folks, were able to gain access to an array of resources, material, political, and ideological, that would surely have been closed to them in earlier times. Arafat and Kohl's voyage to Beijing and Hanoi in March of 1970, with similar trips, was just one link in a much wider network of connections between revolutionary movements and left-wing radicals during the long 1960s. In the 1960s, radical Islam and the political left began to join together. And what we have today, folks, is a repeat of the 60s, but worse. Look what happened last fall. The Democrats passed a resolution applauding non-religious Americans and criticizing churchgoers. Because the non-affiliated, religiously affiliated, is the fastest growing Democratic group. Thousands of Americans have become socialists since March of this year. That was in May. In 2 months, there was a huge swing. What happened? Floyd was killed, and the Black Lives Matter exploded. And in the protest, we had Muslims out there trying to accelerate it into violence. Look at what Archbishop Vigano writes. He used to be the former papal nuncio to the U.S. He wrote to President Trump on the spiritual forces at work in the U.S. riots. They are not spontaneous protest, he argues, but part of a deeper plan to subvert Western Christian civilization. The attack to which you were subjected after your visit to the National Shrine of St. Paul, John Paul II, is part of an orchestrated media narrative which seeks not to fight racism and bring social order, but to aggravate dispositions. Not to bring social justice, but to legitimize violence and crime. Not to serve the truth, but to favor one political faction. Do you think that group of papal nuncios, ambassadors, is with or against Trump and the political right? They're with him, aren't they? You can go to Catholic websites, so-called Catholic websites, like the Church Militant, and you will find that there is a division in the Catholic Church. The conservative Catholics are serious about following the political right, but there is a branch of it, the Catholic Church, that wants to go with the left. You are going to watch a split happening in the church. So this king of the north, king of the south-like conflict is happening in politics in Europe, Israel, and the United States. It's also happening in the Catholic Church. Just remember, God's people get caught in the middle. That's where you need to constantly be checking yourself. Am I joining earthly political groups primarily, or am I primarily following Jesus Christ? I'm not saying you can't vote, but I'm not going to tell you how to vote, because both the king of the north and the king of the south are trouble. You're going to have to figure out what you're going to do with that. But do realize either side is trouble. Either side. What do I expect next? Well, I expect God's people to get caught in the middle, that's for sure. But here's what I'm expecting. It says the king of the south pushes against the king of the north, and the king of the north gets mad and wipes out the king of the south. And since the political right is with the king of the north and the political left is with the king of the south, I'm expecting that Islam and the political left are going to take a last-ditch push, and they're going to push so hard and so fast that they're going to get the other side mad. And there's going to be a response that wipes out radical Islam and the political left, and the political right takes over. Tell me that's not a possibility in our world right now. Does that tell me who's going to win this election? Nope. It doesn't. Because it could happen either way. But based on prophecy, that's the general scenario that I expect. Now the good news. Boy, do I want to end on good news. And I get to those people that escape. They are delivered by Christ. These shall escape from his hand. That's the hand of the king of the north. Edom, Moab, and Ammon. Revelation, Daniel 12:1, and at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. You see, the Hebrew word for translated escape is the same word translated as delivered. So Edom, Moab, and Ammon that are being escaping or delivered are the same people that are delivered when Jesus rescues his people that are in the Lamb's Book of Life. There's a connection here. And Edom, Moab, and Ammon are Muslim. Let's keep going. A parallel, and those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life when they see the beast. You see, there are two groups in Revelation, those who follow the beast and those who are in the Lamb's Book of Life. But Edom, Moab, and Ammon are in the Lamb's Book of Life. That means they have to be following Jesus. There has to be a group of Muslims that escape from the king of the north and the king of the south, and they follow Jesus. Isn't that good news? I think that is fantastic news. And it gets even better. 1 Thessalonians 5, and they shall not escape, but you, brethren, are not in darkness so that this day should overtake you as a thief. How do we escape? By trusting in Jesus. How shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation, which at first began to be spoken by the Lord and was confirmed to us by those who heard him? Now take a look. There's the land of Israel. Notice we have Israel, and just to the right of the Dead Sea, we have Edom, Moab, and Ammon. Western Jordan is side by side with Israel. Guess what? Everything is geopolitical and religious. The land of Jordan and the land of Israel, that is the friendliest border that Israel has with Jordan. They work together on lots of things. So geopolitically, there's a friendly border, but on the religious level, we have a group of God's people, his true Israel, that come together with a group of his people from Islam, and they join together. Now look at this. The Davidic kingdom included Edom, Moab, and Ammon. And so when David's kingdom was there, Edom, Moab, and Ammon were part of his kingdom. When Jesus returns, he restores the Davidic kingdom, which would include Edom, Moab, and Ammon. God's remnant out of Islam. Isn't that sweet? God ties all this stuff together. And the more I've studied, the more I'm amazed at what I find in his word. And it's all happening. Take a look at Acts 15. This is a quote actually from Amos 9. After this, I will return and will rebuild the tabernacle of David, the Davidic kingdom, which has fallen down. I will rebuild its ruins. I will set it up so that the rest of mankind may seek the Lord, even all the Gentiles who are called by my name, says the Lord, who does all these things. But the neat thing is, I got an asterisk by mankind. In Amos chapter 9, in the original, it doesn't say mankind, it says Edom. Oh, Edom is a part of the Davidic kingdom. No kidding. Edom, Moab, and Ammon escape by trusting in Jesus Christ. Then there's this one, Joel 2:28. And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see visions before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. And it shall come to pass that whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved, for in Mount Zion and Jerusalem there shall be deliverance. It said that before the day of the Lord, the coming of Jesus, that there will be dreams and visions. And all over the Muslim world, by the hundreds of thousands, Muslims are having dreams and visions of a man in white called Isa the Righteous One. You would know him as Jesus. Jesus the Righteous One, Isa the Righteous One, comes to them and says that he is their Lord and Savior, and they should trust him for their forgiveness of sins. And he says that they should be trusting and following the book, the Bible, as their guide for life. This is happening by the hundreds of thousands all over the Muslim world. I have a friend, a personal friend, who has a day job in the United States. That covers for his night job. He leads an underground movement in Muslim countries. And he has over 500,000 Muslims in his underground movement that are following Jesus and his book, the Bible. Did you hear those numbers? And that's just my friend. He's not the only one. His friends, the people in his movement, they're followers of Jesus, not his followers. But he's helping them do this. It's amazing what they're getting away with. They don't call themselves Christian. And it's really important that they don't. Why? Because in the Muslim world, if you call yourself a Christian, that means you are a follower of the Pope, because the Christians are the Crusaders. So when I walk into a mosque, friends, I don't call myself a Christian, because I don't want them to shut down. I don't want them to think that I am a follower of the Pope. I am not. I'm a follower of Jesus and the book. So when I come in, I tell them, hey, I'm a follower of Jesus and I'm a true person of the book. You see in the Quran, it says there are true followers of the Bible, the book, that are to be respected. And I just walk right in and I identify them and myself as that, and I start laying out things on why. It can get interesting fast. But I don't identify myself as a Christian. I identify myself as a follower of Jesus in the book, because that's the truth that they need to hear. Because if I say Christian, it doesn't come across that way. And so these people don't claim to be Christian. They claim to be followers of Jesus in the book. And they're being considered a strange form of Muslims. You see, Muslim means one who surrendered to God, and these people say, we're more surrendered to God than we ever were before. And they're getting away with actually teaching in mosque about Jesus as Lord and Savior, and the Bible is your guide for life. And many of the leaders of his group are now Muslim imams or preachers in their mosque. Isn't that awesome? He was telling me a young man converted to following Jesus, but joined a Christian church and was shoved out of his tribe. Luckily, he wasn't killed. He's in a Muslim country. But his father was able to work out a connection and brought him back into the family. And my friend had become friends with this young man and began to teach him how to share Jesus Christ without calling yourself Christian, all right? And he's beginning to build all kinds of bridges. And then my friend says, I noticed that his family sent him to a neighboring city to solve a dispute in the other city. He said, who are you? Oh, I'm just the son of a nobody over here. Really? He sees it happen again. He says, who are you? He says, I'm just a son of a whatever over here. He says, no, who are you really? And he says, okay. And he starts in the 800s to give his genealogy. And my friend, who knows the Muslim culture very well and Muslim history very well, realizes he's listening to the lineage of kings in this area. And he comes down to his father. His father was in line no longer to be king, but to be chief of tribes, of a tribe of about 10 million people that spread over 3 countries. And his father did not want to be chief of this group. And so he says to his brother, you become chief, his younger brother, and I'll just move over to this other city and I'll just stay out of your way. Okay, the brother becomes chief. I don't know what's happened. I haven't seen my friend since last summer. But the last I knew, the uncle that was the chief was dying. And they were thinking about asking this young man that's a follower of Jesus to become the chief of 10 million Muslims. Tell me God's not up to something. Oh man. God's at work. Yes, the world might be going crazy, but God's remnant is forming. What should a true Christian do? Make sure you're trusting in Jesus Christ, sharing the gospel of Jesus, the good news of Jesus, not focusing on a political party, but Jesus, because Jesus loves Antifa, he loves Black Lives Matter, he loves skinheads, he loves the Proud Boys, he loves everybody in that whole group. And if you join any of those groups, how are you going to love the other ones? And so a Christian needs to know that you love them all, but the king of the south and their supporters go down. The king of the north and their supporters go down. And if you want to be standing with Jesus, you got to be standing with Jesus now. I encourage you, stand with Jesus. We live in interesting times. Jesus could be coming really soon. And by the way, Romans 13 tells us that we are to respect those who carry the sword to keep peace. Ooh, that could be a challenge in today's world. We need to respect the military, the police, the political leaders. As long as they are not asking us to do something that is morally wrong, we should cooperate with them. If they ever ask us to do something that's morally wrong, that's the end of my cooperation. You've got to be ready for that stand. But until then, you support them. But here's an interesting thought. You can read the New Testament through, and I can't find where it told us to be those people we're supposed to respect. Jesus told us not to carry the sword. We're supposed to love people and risk our lives for Jesus. Now, if you choose to arm yourself or whatever, that's a question of conscience. But this I know. God's aim is better than mine. Well-armed people get killed. God's aim's better than mine. He can protect me from behind. I'm content to let God take care of it. Oh, I wasn't armed up in northeastern Nigeria. I figured if I commit my life to God, it's His problem. Got in and got out. We live in interesting times. Make sure you follow Jesus. So, Islam attacks the papacy in the U.S., the papacy in the United States overthrow Islam and whoever's associated with it. And papal-led Christianity in the U.S. are in control, and what happens next? We pick that up in our next presentation tomorrow night. It's called The Mark of the Beast. And news from the East, and the North and the East. What comes next is the greatest evangelistic opportunity of all time in this prophecy. You see, radical Islam is down. Moderate Islam pretends to be following Jesus. And that group of Muslims that really are following Jesus and the group of Christians that really are following Jesus, for a little bit, have a wide open opportunity to share the gospel. And everybody's going to be woke up from all this stuff. And they're going to be the best opportunity in all time to share the gospel. Are you ready to roll for Jesus? That's what we've got coming. And I can hardly wait. Tidings from the East and the Mark of the Beast. And again, folks, if you have a group that would like this presentation in your church here in the Bremerton area, as long as it's not evenings or Saturday morning, I will be happy to do it at no charge. And no matter where you are online, if you want to work out an online presentation, live streaming, I can do that, or we can work on details of coming. I'll go anywhere in the world that the governments will allow me to get to under COVID. I was supposed to be in New Zealand in May, but that kind of fell apart. Nobody came and went from New Zealand in May. So wherever it's possible in this COVID world. Thursday night, by the way, after the second session, which will end by 8:30, we will then have a question and answer session for half an hour. And if you have any questions, feel free to write them on the back of these envelopes. Or if you're watching online, send them in by email, either to my website, islamandchristianity.org. Probably you can get it in through chat or whatever as well. Any question, get it to me. I'll answer it on Thursday evening. So write them out and you can have it. Those of you here, you've got an envelope. Statement 1. Islam is the king of the south in Daniel 11 because it came from the southern part of the Roman Empire, invaded Israel from the south, and has fulfilled all aspects of the prophecy so far. So Islam is the king of the south because it came from the south and it's fulfilled prophecy. Do you agree? Yes. Disagree? No. Number 2, both the king of the north and the king of the south have persecuted God's people of faith. Is it true that both sides have caused trouble for God's people? Yes, no, or question. Number 3, radical Islam or Egypt will be overthrown while moderate Islam, Libya, will follow after papal-led Christianity, the king of the north. Radical Islam overthrown, moderate Islam follows the king of the north. And it's interesting that the Sudan, which was part of Ethiopia, already has joined with Israel. Ethiopia will likely do it too because they're mostly Christian. Libya is being ravaged by a civil war that Turkey and Egypt are both involved in. They'd like out of that. They could easily, very quickly, follow papal-led Christianity as well. In other words, all the pieces of the puzzle are almost in place except for one. Egypt has not radicalized. I don't think. The reason I say I don't think, because the Muslim Brotherhood came from Egypt, but in the last free election in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood won. And 1 year later, the military under El-Sisi overthrew the government of the Muslim Brotherhood. And since then, the Muslim Brotherhood has been held in check by force. But what does it tell you when the Muslim Brotherhood won the last free election in Egypt? Egypt is not in love with their military dictator, El-Sisi. That is ready to explode. So I'm just telling you, everything's in place. It's just right there. Number 4, God has a people who will truly follow Jesus in the Bible. God is calling his people out from both Christianity and Islam. Do you see that God is saying to people, hey, follow Jesus in the Bible? Not all Christians are doing it, not all Muslims are doing it, but some Christians and some Muslims are doing it. Do you see that God's already begun to pull that together? If yes, circle that. If not, or question mark. And number 5, I will follow Jesus in what the Bible teaches. Man, I hope you're in with me on that one. Follow Jesus right up the middle. The king of the south goes down, king of the north goes down, but you'll get to be with Jesus forever. Let's close with prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the opportunity of sharing these wonderful things with these folks. And Lord, I just ask that you will pour out your Spirit just like you promised to settle these into our brains. And Lord, lead each person into truth. And if I said something wrong, direct them into truth anyway. You are truth. In Jesus' name I ask it. Amen.